Good Sector 1 for Daniel Kirby. Gilles Lalonde goes green in Sector 1. G. Tammy goes P3 in PRO 106.6.
Fast through Sector 1 for Brian Hall. G. Tammy beginning a flying lap now. Frank Radosti improves in AM with a 110.4. Gilles Lalonde continues to improve through Sector 3. 2 minutes left in the session. Michael Lott going for a time. No improvement for Gilles Lalonde in PRO, stays P5. Michael Lott with a strong opening sector. That's Karl Struhol's best Sector 2 of the session. Sector 2 improvement for Brian Hall. Frank Radosti sets a personal best through Sector 3. Norm Graf is out on a flying lap. Co-leader, Daniel Kirby, 104.9. Karl Struhol through Sector 1 quickly. Fast through Sector 1 for J. Tammy. Personal best in Sector 2 for JT Tammy. In PRO, pole to the back of the field is about 2.7 seconds. And here is how the AM grid lines up, covered by just 3.0 seconds. PR results, Daniel Kirby in the number 90 Dallara IRA 18 on pole with 1:04.9. Michael Lott second, GT Tammy third. In AM, Norm Graf in the number 1 Dallara IR 18 on pole with 1:07.4. Karl Struhol in the number 42 Dallara IR 18 second with 1:07.9. Daniel Fast in the number 404 Dallara IRA 18 third with 1:09.2.
Okay, there we have it. Daniel is always showing the rest of the field how to do it, sneaking under the 105 by 54 thousandths. Very, very nice. Mika and JT come along behind, a little bit slower. Norman Graf out in front again for the AMs, and then Karl and Daniel picking up the second and third places for those two. So nice laps. Looks like everyone put in some PBs
underway.
there.
15 minutes
a lot
to
of
prepare.
times in the sevens.
Qualifying done.
And looking good. So well done, everybody. Okay, everybody. Sooner you go to pit, the quicker we're going to be off to the race.
Attention grid, all non-essential personnel leave the grid now.
Everybody remember, this should be a pace car lap, and it should be at a good speed, so we'll see how it works out. 25 seconds. And the pace car's there. That's a good start. And it's looking good.
And here we have the grid for today's race. 13 cars across 2 classes. Leading the field, PRO. Top of PRO, Daniel Kirby in the number 90 Dallara IR18. At P2, Michael Locke in the number 202 Dallara IR18. P3, Jake Tammy in the number 202 Dallara IR18. Ryan Hall in the number 204 Dallara IR18 P4. At P5, Gilles Lalonde in the number 203 Dallara IR18. Matthew Overton, number 174 Dallara IR18 P6. Chris Dudham in the number 203 Dallara IR18 P7. Next up, AM. Leading AM, Norm Graf in the number 1 Dallara IR18. P2, Carl Struhel in the number 42 Dallara IR18. Daniel Fast, number 404 Dallara IR18 P3. At P4, Daryl Kruger in the number 404 Dallara IR18. James Bowders in the number 92 Dallara IR18 P5. P6, Frank Radosti in the number 403 Dallara IR18.
Hey everybody, have a great race out there.
Daniel Kirby takes the lead in PRO. James Bowders up 2 places to P3 in AM. Traffic cleared for Norm Graf. Matthew Overton climbs 1 position in the PRO class. Gilles Lalonde gets by Carl Struhel. Chris Dudham has been one of the big movers, up 3 from P13 to P10. On board with Norm Graf, chasing Brian Hall for 4th. Daryl Kruger all over James Bowders for P9. Through the start-finish racing. Norm Graf holding P5. James Bowders cruising in P9. Frank Radosti maintaining P13. Michael Locke all over Daniel Kirby for the lead. Norm Graf is under relentless pressure here. couldn't separate these two with a sheet of paper. On board was Gilles Lalonde, chasing Matthew Overton for 6th. In PRO, Daniel Kirby goes fastest with a 1:07.1. In AM, Norm Graf tops the times, 1:09.3. James Bowders improves in Sector 1. A new personal best Sector 1 there for Darrell Kruger. After over a minute, neither driver is backing down. Going on over a minute now, and neither will yield. P1 for Daniel Kirby, a quiet run so far. Brian Hall, lap 3 of 55. Gilles Lalonde has the edge on entry to the first sector. Carl Stroll is pulling away, gap up by 3.6 seconds. That's Darrell Kruger's best Sector 3 of the session. Don't overlook Chris Dudham climbing 3 spots to P10. That's where Daniel Kirby is making time through the first sector. Gap now 4.5 seconds for Brian Hall. Matthew Overton has been quicker, pulling away. The first sector is where Karl Struhal pulls away. Darrell Kruger cruising in P11. Daniel Fars extending the lead. You could set your watch by Daniel Kirby's lap times. Impressive consistency from Jay Tammy. Jay Tammy consistently faster through the first sector. Losing a bit of pace now, Karl Struhal. James Bowders is in a real groove, metronome laps. The lap times are starting to drop off for Darrell Kruger. Frank Radosti struggling to maintain the pace. This is turning into a real chess match. Not this time. Matthew Overton stays P6 in PRO. Here's that PRO passed by Gilles Lalonde on Matthew Overton. Trouble for Matthew Overton in PRO. We rejoin the race, Chris Dudham running P10. On board with Chris Dudham, chasing James Bowders for P9. Brian Hall carries more speed into the first sector. Losing a bit of pace now, Gil Lalonde. 49 to go for Karl Struhal. Matthew Overton's pace is fading. James Bowders behind PRO Matthew Overton. Daniel Fast is struggling to maintain the pace. Darrell Kruger carries more speed through the middle sector. Chris Dudum clears the slower car. Still just 0.4 seconds between them. Remarkably consistent from Micah Locke. The lap times are starting to drop off for Brian Hall. Norm Graf and Gil Lalonde trading advantages through the first and final sectors. P8 Matthew Overton keeping it clean. Chris Dudum is quicker through the first sector. P11 for Daniel Fast, quiet run so far. Frank Radosti continues to improve through sector 3. Micah Locke running 3.3 seconds behind the car ahead. You could set your watch by Norm Graf's lap times. A new personal best sector 2 there for Gil Lalonde. Karl Struhal improves in sector 3. Chris Dudum is getting into a rhythm now. The gap is stretching out for James Bowders. Daniel Fast finding time in sector 2. Traffic cleared for Norm Graf. Frank Radosti is reeling in Darrell Kruger. A gap of 4 seconds for leader Daniel Kirby. On board with JT Tammy chasing Micah Locke for second. Another look at JT Tammy overtaking Micah Locke in PRO. Back living AM, Karl Struhal now P2. Different approaches at the first and final sectors. James Bowders carries more speed. Daniel Fast accelerates harder. Daniel Fast has been quicker, pulling away. Gilles Lalonde extending the lead. J. Tammy cruising in P2. G. Tammy is pulling away, gap up by 3.8 seconds. The gap is coming down for Norm Graf. P6 Gil Lalonde keeping it clean. The gap is under half a second for Karl Struhal. Daniel Foss braking deeper into the first sector. The gap is stretching out for Daniel Foss. The middle sector is where Daniel Foss is quicker. Gap down to 0.7 seconds for Chris Dudum. Daniel Kirby has the edge on entry to the first sector. Gap now 5.5 seconds for Jay Tammy. That's where Jay Tammy is making time through the first sector. Norm Graf is building a cushion. Good pace from Chris Dudum through the middle sector. Sector 1 improvement for Daniel Foss. Issues for Gil Lalonde in the PRO class. Let's see what happened. We're back live. Chris Dudum now P7. Brian Hall is pulling away. Gap up by 8.4 seconds. Gilles Lalonde has ducked into the pits from P9. Frank Radosti hanging tough in this battle. Karl Struhal has been quicker, pulling away. Multi-class traffic as Daniel Foss catches Gilles Lalonde. Chris Dudum on the move in PRO, up to P5. Chris Dudum gets it done, into P5 in PRO. Here's Chris Dudum's pass on Matthew Overton in PRO. Back left, Frank Radosti sitting P12. Frank Radosti all over Daryl Kruger for P11. Norm Graf has the advantage at the first sector. P6 for Chris Dudum, a quiet run so far. Daniel Kirby leading the race. Frank Radosti brakes later. Gilles Lalonde exits faster at the first and final sectors. Micah Locke and Norm Graf trading advantages through the first and final sectors. Norm Graf is quicker through the first sector. Chris Dudum consistently faster through the first sector. Chris Dudum extending the lead. Watch the braking into the first sector. Matthew Overton is later there. Different approaches at the first and final sectors. Daniel Kirby carries more speed. J. Tommy accelerates harder. Over a minute of this and still nothing between them. Chris Dudham is reeling in Brian Hall. Chris Dudham through in PRO. Now P4. Here's that PRO pass by Chris Dudham on Brian Hall. Back to the action, and Daniel Kirby's up to P1. Chris Dudham has the advantage through the middle sector. Chris Dudham has the advantage at the first sector. Daniel Foss heading into pit lane. Daniel Foss brakes later. Darrell Kruger exits faster at the first and final sectors. Here's the replay. We're back live. Norm Graf now P4. Meanwhile, Chris Dudham pitting from P5. Brian Hall up one place to P4 in PRO. Carl Struhl is losing touch with Chris Dudham. Pit stop for Carl Struhl, currently P8. Chris Dudham is quicker through the first sector. James Bowders has ducked into the pits from P9. Chris Dudham back out on track. Darrell Kruger is quicker on the power out of the final sector. Micah Locke heading into pit lane. Darrell Kruger climbs one position in the AM class. Pit stop complete for Daniel Kirby. Traffic for Norm Graf. PRO car ahead. Meanwhile, Brian Hall pitting from P5. Daniel Kirby 18 laps in, holding a 4-second lead. The gap is stretching out for Brian Hall. Chris Dudham goes green in sector 3. Brian Hall rejoins from the pits. The first sector is where Darrell Kruger pulls away. Pit stop for Frank Radosti, currently P10. PO Matthew Overton behind AM Carl Struhal. James Bowders accelerating harder from the final sector. Frank Radosti is pulling away, gap up by 1.6 seconds. Daniel Farce on the move in AM, up to P5. Norm Graf with the entry, Michael Locke with the exit at the first and final sectors. Frank Radosti back out on track. Chris Dudum improves in Sector 2. Chris Dudum extending the lead. Green Sector 2 for Karl Struhal. Karl Struhal has been quicker, pulling away. Daryl Kruger heading into pit lane. Purple Sector 1 for Daniel Kirby. James Bowders continues to improve through Sector 2. Gap now 1.7 seconds for Daniel Farce. Frank Radosti consistently faster through the first sector. Pit stop complete for Daryl Kruger. Multi-class traffic as Chris Dudum catches Norm Graf. Great progress from Frank Radosti. Now P5 in AM. That's where Karl Struhal is making time through the first sector. Nobody quicker than Daniel Kirby in Sector 3. James Bowders goes green in Sector 3. Watch the incident. And we're back live. AM Norm Graf up to P1. Frank Radosti improves in Sector 2. Norm Graf sets a personal best through Sector 2. Brian Hall and Karl Struhal trading time through the first and final sectors. Karl Struhal in the AM closing on Brian Hall. James Bowders breaking deeper into the first sector. The gap is stretching out for James Bowders. Daniel Farce is quicker through the first sector. Gilles Lalonde has the edge on entry to the first sector. Frank Radosti carries more speed through the middle sector. Daryl Kruger is losing touch with Frank Radosti. Karl Struhal is chipping away at Brian Hall's lead, 9.6 seconds now. we have a fight for position here. Chris Dudum closing right up. Karl Strual has the advantage at the first sector. Tammy brakes later. Michael Lock exits faster at the first and final sectors. Karl Strual is faster in, but Matthew Overton gets the better exit from the first and final sectors. Daniel Fars with the entry, Frank Radosti with the exit at the first and final sectors. Darrell Kruger brakes later, Gilles Lalonde exits faster at the first and final sectors. Lap after lap, and nothing can split them. Gilles Lalonde in trouble on the replay now. We rejoin the race, Chris Dudum running P5. Darrell Kruger continues to improve through Sector 2. A new personal best Sector 1 there for J. Tammy. Chris Dudum works through traffic. The first sector is where Michael Lock pulls away. Michael Lock has been quicker, pulling away. We're at the halfway mark, 27 laps to go. Norm Graf is under relentless pressure here. On board with Norm Graf, chasing Chris Dudum for fourth. Chris Dudum is making time through the middle sector. Here's something interesting we missed. Backlip JT Tammy sitting P2. Michael Lock and Chris Duggan trading advantages through the first and final sectors. Different approaches at the first and final sectors. Frank Radusty carries more speed. Daryl Kruger accelerates harder. Chris Dudum is pulling away, gap up by 3.2 seconds. Chris Dudum has ducked into the pits from P4. Chris Dudum and Brian Hall trading time through the first and final sectors. Frank Radosti is losing touch with James Bowders. Meanwhile, Carl Struhal pitting from P7. Daniel Fast having a tough race, down 3 from P9 to P12. James Bowders heading into pit lane. Carl Struhal rejoins from the pits. Pit stop for Jay Tammy, currently P2. James Bowders back out on track. James Bowders is faster in, but Frank Radosti gets the better exit from the first and final sectors. Watch the braking into the first sector. Daniel Fast is later there. Micah Locke has ducked into the pits from P3. Pit stop complete for Jay Tammy. Here's the replay. Daniel Fast all over Darrell Kruger for P11. Back to the action, and Jay Tammy's up to P2. Big moment, Daniel Kirby pits from the lead. Frank Radosti is quicker through the first sector. Meanwhile, Brian Hall pitting from P6. And Daniel Fast drops out of the race from P12. Different approaches at the first and final sectors. Brian Hall carries more speed. Matthew Overton accelerates harder. That's where Brian Hall is making time through the first sector. Micah Locke heading into pit lane. Traffic for Carl Struhal. PRO car ahead. Gap now 30.6 seconds for Norm Graff. Matthew Overton rejoins from the pits. Micah Locke has dropped 3 positions since the start. Micah Locke back out on track. The first sector is where Darrell Kruger pulls away. Pit stop complete for Frank Radosti. Micah Locke with the entry, Brian Hall with the exit of the first and final sectors. Norm Graff has ducked into the pits from P3. Daniel Kirby with a 4-second advantage at the front. Norm Graf and Chris Dudham trading time through the first and final sectors. Norm Graf is pulling away, gap up by 2.7 seconds. Norm Graf rejoins from the pits. G. Tammy sets the benchmark in Sector 1. The gap is stretching out for Darrell Kruger. A gap of 4 seconds for leader Daniel Kirby. Gilles Lalonde is losing touch with Daniel Faas. Gilles Lalonde extending the lead. G. Tammy breaks later. Chris Dudham exits faster at the first and final sectors. Gap now 7.5 seconds for Michael Locke. Trouble for Gilles Lalonde in PRO. Let's see what happened. We're back live. Chris Dudham now P3. Daniel Faas consistently faster through the first sector. Chris Dudham is quicker through the first sector. Different approaches at the first and final sectors. James Bowders carries more speed. Darrell Kruger accelerates harder. Chris Dudham has the advantage at the first sector. Let's look back at something we missed earlier. We rejoin the race. Daniel Kirby running P1. Chris Dudham has cut the gap by 30.5 seconds. Brian Hall catching the AM Norm Graf. Gilles Lalonde and Daniel Faas trading advantages through the first and final sectors. Norm Graff and Brian Hall trading time through the first and final sectors. Tammy goes green in sector 2. Pit stop for Karl Struhal, currently P7. Gilles Lalande had a significant problem on lap 34. Here's what we missed. Back lived Daniel Kirby sitting P1. Karl Struhal brakes later. Frank Radosti exits faster at the first and final sectors. Chris Dudum and Michael Ott trading advantages through the first and final sectors. Karl Struhal struggling, now P11 from a P8 start. Karl Struhal back out on track. James Bowders heading into pit lane. Matthew Overton with the entry, James Bowders with the exit at the first and final sectors. Pit stop complete for James Bowders. Different approaches at the first and final sectors. Darrell Kruger carries more speed, Karl Struhal accelerates harder. That's where Darrell Kruger is making time through the first sector. The gap is stretching out for Karl Struhal. Chris Dodham has ducked into the pits from P3. Michael Lott climbs one position in the PRO class. Chris Dodham rejoins from the pits. Chris Dodham is faster in, but Norm Graf gets the better exit from the first and final sectors. Matthew Overton has problems in PRO. Watch the incident. We're back live, Daniel Kirby now P1. The first sector is where Gilles Alonda pulls away. James Bowders all over Matthew Overton for P7. While we were elsewhere, Matthew Overton stopped on track on lap 46. Back to the action, and Norm Graf's up to P5. Frank Radosti in the AM closing on Matthew Overton. Multi-class traffic as Darrell Kruger catches Matthew Overton. Ryan Hall with the entry, James Bowders with the exit at the first and final sectors. And Karl Struhel in trouble. On the replay now, Karl Struhel all over Matthew Overton for P10. We rejoin the race, Daniel Kirby running P1. Darrell Kruger has the advantage at the first sector. Traffic for Norm Graf. PRO car ahead. Let's look back at when Karl Struhel came to a halt on lap 47. We rejoin the AM action, Darrell Kruger running P4. James Bowders consistently faster through the first sector. Darrell Kruger is pulling away, gap up by 1.4 seconds. James Bowders in the AM closing on Brian Hall. Two left. A mere 0.3 seconds covering this intense fight. Matthew Overton had a significant problem on lap 46. Here's what we missed. Back live, Daniel Kirby sitting P1. Gilles Lalonde back out on track. Checkered flag for Daniel Kirby in PRO. Runner-up in PRO, Jay Tammy. P3 in PRO, Micah Locke. Victory in AM for Norm Graff. James Bowders finishes P2 in AM. Frank Radosti rounds out the AM podium. P4 for Chris Dudham. On to the rest of PRO field. P5, Brian Hall. P6 in PRO, Matthew Overton. Filling out the PRO order, P7 Gilles Lalonde. AM P4 for Darrell Kruger. Carl Struholm home P5 in AM. Filling out the AM order, P6 Daniel Fass.
And everybody's
Okay, I think
across.
that's it. Daniel, well done for the win. JT and Mika running out the top three. And then Norm going from flag to flag for the AM, followed by James and Frank. Nice racing, guys.
Our new friend. Yeah, good run, dude. Yeah, our new friend Daniel Fast didn't know there was no starter.
Yeah,
No.
at that start when you stalled your car, I tried to push you to get you to jump start
Who you talking to?
to Daniel.
Daniel's gone a long time ago.
Oh, is he?
Who spun and came on right in front of me at the end of the race.
Middle of the second.
Yeah, he stalled it on the
In the last
starting,
section.
getting off the line, and I
did
pushed
he?
him to the bridge trying to get him to jump start.
It's a red and blue car.
Matthew, I had my front wheel in front of your wing.
Who we talked to?
But you?
Yeah, I know. I just didn't get turned.
I moved out of the way, but what happened afterward? I saw you spun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I went backwards. I had managed to stay in the race, and then yeah.
I crashed twice. The first time I removed my front right suspension, 242 second. And on the second time, that was a moment of inattention because I had pace. I was going well. But then at the end, I was just trying for fun, trying to do the fastest lap I could do, and I lost it and took out the rear wing. Another 192.
And is
I
Chris still
just
here?
quietly trundled along.
Yeah,
I-
Chris is here. We both sigged at the same time there at the end of the race.
Yep.
It was a fun race. It was a track in the car. It was fun.
At least my
We hit lap 45. I realized I was getting dizzy.
at least my fuel calculations worked out.
This track is a lot smoother than that other one.